She stood in my kitchen. My kitchen, in the house I paid for, with a glass of my wine in her hand and a smile so wide I could see every single one of her veneers. My mother-in-law. The woman who had spent 6 years treating me like a tolerated inconvenience. And she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I'm glad my son cheated on you. You were never good enough for him. Now we're going to take you for every single penny in spousal support." She laughed after she said it. Actually laughed. She had no idea I was already holding the document that was going to leave them both with nothing. Not even a shred of dignity. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without understanding who I was before I became the woman standing in that kitchen, with a prenuptial agreement in her back pocket and ice water running through her veins. I grew up watching my mother work 2 jobs to keep the lights on. She was brilliant, genuinely, quietly brilliant, but she married a man who didn't respect her, and when that marriage fell apart, she had nothing to protect herself with. No savings in her name, no legal shield. She rebuilt from scratch in her 40s, and she made me promise, when I was old enough to understand what a promise meant, that I would never put myself in that position. Love is real, she told me. But love doesn't pay lawyers. I took that to heart. I built a career in financial consulting. By the time I was 32, I had a portfolio, a savings account that would make most people's eyes water, and a very clear understanding of how money and marriage intersect in ways most people don't want to think about when they're in the honeymoon phase. That's when I met Daniel. Daniel was charming in that effortless way that makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. He was funny, attentive, and for the first year, he made me feel genuinely seen. His mother, Patricia, was another story from the very beginning. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down like she was appraising livestock and said, with a tight little smile, "Daniel's always had such interesting taste." I smiled back. I filed it away. When Daniel and I got engaged, I told him I wanted a prenuptial agreement. I expected pushback. What I got instead was a full week of silent treatment. A tearful phone call from Patricia telling me I was, insulting her son's integrity, and a sit-down dinner where both of them tried to talk me out of it. Patricia called it planning for failure. She said only people who didn't truly love each other needed prenups. She said it with such conviction, such wounded maternal authority, that I almost felt guilty. Daniel eventually signed reluctantly, with the energy of a man who believed it would never matter. The prenup was clear. Any assets I brought into the marriage remained mine. Any property purchased primarily with my income remained mine. In the event of infidelity proven by documentation, Daniel would waive all rights to spousal support. My attorney was thorough. The agreement was ironclad. I put it in a fireproof safe and tried very hard to forget it existed, because I wanted to believe I'd never need it. For a while I didn't. But here's the thing about clues. They don't announce themselves. And the first whisper came about 18 months ago, so quietly I almost missed it entirely. It was a Tuesday evening. I came home early from a work trip. Flight delay resolved faster than expected, and the house felt different. Not wrong, exactly. Just recently rearranged. A throw pillow on the wrong side of the couch. A coffee mug in the drying rack that wasn't mine and wasn't Daniel's usual. A faint trace of a perfume I didn't recognize near the downstairs bathroom. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was pattern matching because of stress, because of a big client presentation, because I'd been traveling too much. I told myself a lot of things. But I'm a financial consultant. My entire job is noticing when the numbers don't add up. And once I started looking, really looking, the numbers didn't add up at all. Restaurant charges on a joint card for places Daniel said he'd never heard of. A hotel booking in a city he claimed to have a conference in, but when I casually asked his colleague about that conference at a dinner party, she looked confused and said there hadn't been one. Gas station receipts from towns 40 minutes in the wrong direction. None of it was a smoking gun on its own. Together, it was a map. I hired a private investigator. I want to be honest about that, because some people act like it's a dramatic or extreme step. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical. It was exactly what my mother raised me to be when something felt financially or emotionally wrong. Get the receipts. Get the documentation. Don't act on feeling alone. The investigator came back to me 3 weeks later, with photographs, timestamps, and a very straightforward report. Daniel had been seeing a woman, I'll call her Vanessa, for approximately 8 months. They had a routine, Tuesdays and the occasional Thursday. Always the same hotel. Always paid in cash, which explained certain ATM withdrawals I'd flagged but couldn't pin down. I sat with that information for 4 days. I didn't cry immediately, which surprised me. What I felt first was something colder than sadness. It was the specific, clarifying sensation of being proven right about something you desperately wished you'd been wrong about. I had hoped the prenup would never matter. Now it was the most important document I owned. On the 5th day, I called my attorney. On the 6th day, I called my closest friend and cried for 2 hours straight. On the 7th day, I was ready. Here's the retention question I want you to sit with right now. I hadn't confronted Daniel yet. I hadn't said a single word. So how did Patricia find out? And why, instead of being horrified, was she celebrating? Stay with me, because what happened next is the part that changed everything. I came home on a Saturday afternoon to find Patricia's car in my driveway. This wasn't unusual. She had a habit of dropping by unannounced, which I had tolerated for years, with gritted teeth and deep breathing. What was unusual was the energy when I walked through the door. Daniel was in the living room. Patricia was seated across from him. They both looked up when I entered, and there was something in their expressions. Not guilt, not alarm, but a kind of settled, almost rehearsed composure. Like they'd been waiting for me. Like they'd had a conversation and arrived at a decision. Patricia spoke first. She said Daniel had something to tell me. Daniel, to his credit, or perhaps just to his cowardice, looked at the floor and admitted that yes, he'd been seeing someone else. He said it had been going on for a while. He said he was sorry. He said the word sorry with the same energy you use when you bump into someone in a grocery store aisle. And then Patricia leaned forward in her chair, in my house, and she said the thing that detonated whatever was left of my composure. She said she was glad it had finally come out. She said Daniel deserved to be with someone who matched his energy. She said I had always been too focused on money, too cold, too career-driven. And then she said it. We're going to take you for every penny in spousal support. You earn more than he does. That's just how the law works, sweetheart. She called me sweetheart. And she smiled. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at Daniel, who still hadn't raised his eyes from the carpet. And I walked to the kitchen counter, opened the drawer where I'd placed it that morning. Because yes, I had anticipated this conversation, because I am my mother's daughter. And I set the prenuptial agreement on the coffee table in front of them both. I'd like you to take a look at page 7, I said. Specifically, the infidelity clause. The silence that followed was one of the most satisfying sounds I have ever heard in my life. Patricia picked up the document. She read slowly. I watched her face move through confusion, then disbelief, then a very particular kind of rage that only comes when someone realizes they've been outmaneuvered by someone they underestimated. Daniel finally looked up from the carpet. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. He said, "You had this the whole time?" "You signed it," I said. "At the kitchen table, in your mother's house. Your attorney reviewed it." "My attorney reviewed it." Patricia started talking about contesting it. She said prenups could be thrown out. She said judges had discretion. She said all the things people say when they suddenly discover that the legal ground they thought was solid is actually a trapdoor. I had already spoken to my attorney at length about the enforceability of this specific agreement. It had been drafted carefully, signed voluntarily, with independent legal counsel on both sides, and it contained no provisions that would make it unconscionable under state law. It was going to hold. My attorney had been very confident about that. I told them both that I would be filing for divorce the following week. I told Daniel he was welcome to consult whatever attorney he chose, but that the outcome was not going to be what Patricia had envisioned. I told Patricia that I appreciated her honesty about her feelings, because it had made the next step considerably easier for me emotionally. Then I asked them both to leave my house. Daniel moved out within the week. He moved in with his brother Marcus, about 40 minutes away. Patricia, I later learned, had been living in a house that Daniel had been quietly subsidizing, not from his own salary, which was modest, but from a joint account that he had been drawing from without my full awareness. When my attorney froze the joint assets during the divorce proceedings, that subsidy stopped. And Patricia, it turned out, had not been paying her own bills. This is the part of the story I want you to understand clearly, because it matters. Patricia's house, a lovely 3-bedroom in a neighborhood she was very proud of, was not fully hers. She had a mortgage. She had utility arrears. She had, according to what came out during the financial discovery process of the divorce, been living on a combination of Daniel's contributions and a kind of optimistic financial denial that I recognized immediately as the same pattern I'd spent my entire career helping clients dig out of. Except I wasn't going to help Patricia dig out of anything. Without Daniel's contributions, she fell behind on the mortgage within 60 days. Within 5 months, the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. I found out about the foreclosure through a contact in the real estate industry, completely legitimate, public record, and I want to be transparent about what happened next, because I've had people ask me if I planned it. The honest answer is, I saw an opportunity, and I took it. Patricia's house went to auction. It was a nice house, genuinely nice, in a good neighborhood, with a garden she had spent years cultivating and a kitchen she had renovated twice. She loved that house. She talked about that house the way some people talk about their children. It was her identity, her proof of a certain kind of success. I bought it at auction. I want you to sit with that for a second. The woman who stood in my kitchen with my wine in her hand, laughing about how she and her son were going to take me for every penny, that woman's dream home now belongs to me. I hold the deed. My name is on the title. I'm not living in it. I want to be clear about that. I moved to Malibu. I had always wanted to live near the water, and the divorce settlement, which left Daniel with exactly what the prenup specified, which was very little, freed up enough of my financial picture that I could make that move comfortably. I bought a place with a view that makes me feel, every single morning, like I won. Because I did. Patricia's house, her house, the one she bragged about, the one she used as social currency for years. I'm renting it out. It generates income. It sits in my portfolio alongside everything else I built before Daniel and everything I'll build after him. As for Daniel and Patricia, they are, as of the last information I have, sharing a room at Marcus's apartment. Marcus has 2 kids and a small house, and, by all accounts, a very patient wife who did not ask for any of this. I don't take pleasure in Marcus's inconvenience. He was never unkind to me, but the situation is what it is. I have had a lot of time to think about what this experience taught me, and I want to share that honestly because I think it matters beyond the satisfaction of the outcome. The first thing I learned is that the people who argue most loudly against protecting yourself are almost always the people who benefit from you being unprotected. Patricia fought the prenup because she had already calculated what she thought her son could extract from me. She wasn't protecting Daniel's dignity. She was protecting a financial strategy she'd built around his marriage to me. When I understood that, so much of her behavior over 6 years suddenly made sense. The subtle undermining. The comments about my career being too consuming. The way she'd pushed Daniel toward dependency rather than ambition. She needed him to need me, and she needed me to be unguarded. The second thing I learned is that documentation is everything. I did not go into that Saturday confrontation on emotion alone. I had the investigator's report. I had the prenup. I had already spoken to my attorney. When Patricia made her move, I had already made mine. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to lay the cards down. That's not coldness. That's preparation. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like it. The third thing, and this is the one that took me the longest to sit with, is that I genuinely loved Daniel, or at least I loved who I believed he was. The grief of that is real, and it didn't go away just because the legal outcome was favorable. I spent several months in therapy working through the specific kind of loss that comes when you realize the relationship you thought you were in was not the relationship the other person thought they were in. That's its own kind of mourning. The prenup protected my finances. It didn't protect my heart. I had to do that work myself. But I did the work. And I came out the other side in Malibu with a view of the Pacific, and a rental property that used to be my mother-in-law's proudest possession, and a life that is entirely, completely, unambiguously mine. Someone asked me recently, a friend who knew the whole story, whether I felt guilty about buying Patricia's house specifically, whether it was too much, whether I'd crossed some line between justice and cruelty. I thought about it seriously, the way I try to think about every serious question. And here's what I came back to. Patricia didn't lose her house because I bought it. She lost her house because she stopped paying for it. She lost it because the financial strategy she'd built around her son's marriage collapsed when that marriage revealed itself to be exactly what it was. I simply observed a public auction and made a legal purchase. The fact that it was her house specifically, the house she used to represent everything she thought she had over me, that's not cruelty. That's the universe having a very precise sense of irony. I didn't engineer her downfall. I just didn't step in to stop it. And after she stood in my kitchen and laughed at me, I felt exactly zero obligation to do so. If you're in a situation right now where someone is telling you that protecting yourself is an insult to love, hear me. Love and legal protection are not opposites. A person who truly loves you will not be threatened by a document. A person who fights your self-protection is telling you something important about their intentions. My mother told me that love is real, but love doesn't pay lawyers. She was right. But here's what I'd add. Having lived it, love doesn't buy Malibu views either. Preparation does. Knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone, not a cheating husband, not a laughing mother-in-law, not anyone, convince you that you deserve less than what you built. I'm sitting on my porch right now, looking at the water. And somewhere 40 minutes away, in a cramped room in Marcus's apartment, two people are learning a very expensive lesson about underestimating the woman they thought they had figured out. I hope they're taking notes.